Elara moved like a ghost through the hushed expanse of the Fairmont Grand Hotel's cafe, a place that usually pulsed with high-stakes finance chatter, but at 1:17 a.m. on a frigid Tuesday, was silent and sterile. She was working the graveyard shift, clinging to a job she desperately needed, aware that every minute she spent here meant another minute her son was with a babysitter she barely trusted. The Fairmont wasn't just a hotel, it was a fortress of old money, and its rules were as unyielding as the marble beneath Elara's worn-out service shoes. Her uniform felt heavy, a reminder of her precarious position. Take a look at the scene. The dining room, usually bright, was dimmed to a low, judgmental amber, reflecting off the spotless silverware. The tension was palpable. The rumors of corporate restructuring and staff cuts hung in the air like dust. Elara wiped the same spotless countertop for the 5th time, just waiting for the clock to hit 2:00 a.m. when she could lock up and finally collapse. But the quiet was suddenly sharply broken. The sound of a keycard scraping urgently against the main door lock, followed by a frantic burst of wind, and a man stumbling into the lobby. He wasn't a partygoer, and he wasn't drunk. He was visibly acutely distressed. He clutched a baby carrier to his chest, and from the carrier came the thin, ragged sound of a newborn wail. This was not the clientele of the Fairmont's late-night service. The man's name, as we would later learn, was Elias Thorne, and he was in crisis. His tailored, expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and there was a 3-day shadow on his jaw. Yet what caught Elara's eye was the gleaming, heavy platinum watch on his wrist, a clear indicator of staggering wealth, jarringly mismatched with his current panic state. He approached her counter, his eyes wide and unfocused. He wasn't asking for a 5-star meal, he was asking for something impossibly simple, yet currently unavailable. "I need hot water," he gasped, the infant Leo crying louder now. "Not warm, hot. The sweet service is off, and the steamer is broken. I need to sterilize this bottle and warm the formula now. Please, I can't get him to stop." Elara knew the rules. Every kitchen appliance was locked down after midnight for cleaning protocols. The main burners were cold. Unauthorized access was an immediate firing offense, a breach of the strict operational code. But the sound of that baby crying and the raw fear in the wealthy man's eyes cut straight through the corporate policy. What happens next determines everything. Elara's decision was instantaneous, overriding 3 years of ingrained compliance. The sound of the infant, Leo, a sound she knew intimately from her own sleepless nights, was a call she couldn't ignore. "Follow me," quickly she instructed, her voice low and decisive, the cinematic tension mounting as they moved against the hotel's stringent late-night flow. She bypassed the main locked kitchen and led Elias through a maze of back-of-house corridors. A look at the security footage would show this precise moment. As the moment Elara crossed the professional line to a smaller, seldom-used utility kitchen, meant only for staff coffee and minor cleaning, she pointed to the small industrial boiler tap. "This is the only thing running hot enough. Be careful." As Elias fumbled with the complex process of mixing the formula, his hands, which were clearly accustomed to signing documents, not measuring powder, shaking slightly, Elara took a moment to study him, observing the sheer inadequacy of wealth in the face of basic parental need. The distress was genuine. This was a man operating purely on adrenaline and love. The crying began to subside as the warm bottle found its mark, and the immediate crisis was averted. It was in that moment of fragile calm that the secondary drama unfolded. Elias pulled a sleek, bespoke satellite phone from his jacket pocket, a device far too powerful for standard hotel Wi-Fi, and answered a call that had been vibrating silently against his chest. His voice dropped to a barely audible rasp, his entire demeanor shifting instantly from vulnerable father to high-stakes power player. Elara, keeping a polite distance, couldn't help but overhear fragments. "The merger is still on track, but the leak has compromised the valuation of the assets. We need to lock down the subsidiaries before morning. And yes, I am still in the residential suite. The Fairmont deal must close, no delays." He paused, gripping the phone tightly. "I am the only one who can sign. Tell them I'll be there for the 10,000 AM summit." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. The Fairmont deal, the pieces don't fit, do they? A man who clearly commanded multi-million-dollar deals who was running a corporate operation from a hidden suite, was simultaneously so alone and desperate that he had to beg a minimum wage waitress for hot water at 1 This was no ordinary high roller. This was someone deeply, mysteriously involved in the very fate of the hotel group Elara worked for, yet grounded by the fundamental, universal reality of a hungry, crying baby. The unanswered question now hung in the air. Who is Elias Thorne, and what is the nature of his secret operation within this luxury fortress? The relief on Elias Thorne's face once Leo settled was immediate, profound, and quickly masked by renewed tension. He finished the feeding in hushed silence, the only sound the soft sucking of the infant. He stood up, smoothed his expensive suit, and offered Elara a strained, grateful nod that didn't quite meet her eyes. He quickly pulled a thick wad of cash from his wallet, counted out an astonishing amount, $2,000 in crisp hundreds, and placed it anonymously beneath a folded napkin on the counter, a tip so excessive it immediately screamed either guilt or profound desperation. Without another word, he snatched up the baby carrier and vanished back into the lobby, leaving Elara alone with the steaming utility tap and the heavy consequence of her breach of policy. The financial reality of the tip was staggering, enough to cover 2 months of Elara's rent, but the sheer anonymity and speed of his exit felt wrong, like a transaction designed to erase the moment of human connection. The money didn't buy Elara's silence, but it bought Elias his escape. This is where the story shifts from human drama to corporate investigation. Less than 10 minutes after Elias disappeared, the inevitable happened. Mr. Jennings, the floor manager, a man whose ambition was only exceeded by his adherence to corporate protocol, materialized, his face a mask of cold displeasure. Jennings hadn't seen the man, but he had seen the discrepancy, the utility kitchen light on Elara in the wrong place, and the massive, unexplained cash tip lying brazenly on the cafe counter. Elara, explain the unauthorized access to the utility bay, Jennings demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Elara, sticking to the humanitarian truth, explained the desperate situation, the single father, the hungry baby, the broken steamer, but Jennings was unconvinced. He focused entirely on the anomaly of the tip and the mystery of the guest. You let an unknown civilian into a secure area, and he left you $2,000. Who was this man, Elara? Identify him now. Security logs show an unauthorized access key was used in a private residential wing moments after you let him leave. This man is flagged. Jennings's words amplified the chilling implication of Elias's phone call. This was no ordinary guest. This was a man operating in shadow, and Elara, by helping him, had inadvertently put herself in the crosshairs of whatever high-stakes deal he was running. Jennings immediately placed Elara on disciplinary leave, effective immediately pending a full security review. The irony was brutal. She was suspended for an act of pure compassion, and her desperately needed income was cut off because of the very man she helped. The question now moves from who he is to what he's doing. Why was the future of the Fairmont Grand Hotel tied up with a frantic, sleep-deprived father using an unauthorized key? The disciplinary notice hit Elara like a physical blow. The loss of income, even for a few days, was a disaster. The financial tightrope Elara walked was thin, and this suspension was the final push. Take a closer look at the reality. She had a sick mother and a young son, and every dollar mattered. The Fairmont's corporate ruthlessness, embodied by the smirking Mr. Jennings, felt personal and utterly unforgivable. The next morning, the hotel was a hive of frantic, hushed activity. This wasn't the usual five-star bustle. This was an atmosphere of palpable, institutional dread. Security guards were tripled, private unmarked cars lined the perimeter, and a relentless parade of suits, clearly flown in from multiple continents, streamed toward the high-security ballroom on the top floor. The Fairmont deal Elias had whispered about was clearly the epicenter of this financial earthquake. Elara, technically on leave but needing to collect her personal items, stayed low, observing the corporate chaos from the staff locker room. Her friend Maya, who worked catering and was preparing the high-dollar lunch service for the closed-door meeting, kept Elara updated, her whispered accounts fueling Elara's rising frustration. It's the big one, Elara, the merger. They're selling off parts of the entire group. They say the man leading the negotiations flew in yesterday and hasn't left the building, Maya reported, her eyes wide. Maya sneaked Elara a momentary look at the private entrance used by the executives, a velvet rope and 4 armed guards marking the boundary. Here's how it unfolded. As the final group of principal players arrived, a tight, formidable circle of lawyers, investors, and CEOs, Elara felt her breath hitch in her throat. The group was led by an imposing man, flanked by silent bodyguards and holding himself with an authority that commanded instant deference. It was Elias Thorne, not the sleep-deprived, frantic father she'd helped in the utility kitchen, but a clean-shaven, impeccably dressed figure of staggering corporate power. The platinum watch was on his wrist, but now it matched the icy resolution in his eyes. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't even an ordinary executive. He was leading the deal. He walked past the staff without seeing them, his focus entirely on the doors ahead. Maya leaned in, whispering, "That's him, Elias Thorne. He's the chief executive officer of the investment group that owns the entire hotel conglomerate. They say he's ruthless. He's the man who decides who stays and who goes." The truth hit Elara with the force of an oncoming train. The man she had saved from a disciplinary report, the man who had begged her for hot water, was the same man who now had the power to fire her and her entire department. The $2,000 wasn't a tip, it was guilt money. The vulnerability she had witnessed was now juxtaposed against this terrifying, undeniable power. The open loop was closing. The man who owned the hotel was the single dad she helped, but the full story of his chaotic night was still missing. The rage and injustice that flared in Elara was a sudden, white-hot heat. She had risked her job for a stranger's child, only to find that the stranger was her boss's ultimate boss, the architect of the very austerity that now threatened her family's stability. This was a classic juxtaposition of humanity against cold corporate machinery, and Elara refused to be the silent victim. Ignoring Maya's frantic whispers, Elara used her knowledge of the staff service routes, moving quickly and silently through ventilation shafts and linen closets, the back channels of the hotel where the real work happened, to reach the executive floor. The tension was at its peak. She waited near the private elevator lobby, the signed suspension notice, a symbol of the fight, clutched in her hand. This was a sudden action moment, a clash between corporate might and a single employee's moral conviction. She didn't have to wait long. The meeting recessed, and Elias Thorne emerged first, his phone already pressed to his ear, his face etched with bone-deep exhaustion. But he wasn't carrying a briefcase. Slung over his shoulder, almost hidden by his suit jacket, was a simple, insulated bottle carrier. Leo's gear. Elara stepped directly into his path, forcing him to stop. Security personnel immediately tensed, ready to intervene. Elara didn't shout. She spoke with the clear, simple phrasing of undeniable truth. "Mr. Thorne," she said, holding up the suspension notice, "this is the result of me following human instinct over your corporate policy. I helped you, the CEO, feed your son. Now I can't feed mine." The room went silent. All eyes, from the lawyers to the bodyguards, snapped to the confrontation. Elias, seeing the notice, didn't react with anger or surprise, but with an immense deflating weariness. He signaled the security detail to stand down, and in that tense cinematic moment, the high-stakes CEO was gone, replaced by the vulnerable father from the night before. He looked at the notice, then at Elara, and finally, the full, devastating truth came out. He confessed that his wife had suffered a sudden, severe complication after childbirth, and had been rushed into emergency surgery 2 days prior. He had been living in the hotel's private suite, which he owned but rarely used, running the billion-dollar merger that secured the future of the Fairmont Group from his laptop, while being the sole exhausted caretaker of his newborn son, Leo. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. The secretive key, the rushed operation, the low-voiced call about the leak, the absolute panic over hot water, it all snapped into agonizing, terrifying focus. He owned the hotel, but the crisis of fatherhood trumped the crisis of business, rendering him just another desperate dad in the dark. The silence that followed Elias Thorne's confession was heavier than any tension. Elara's anger immediately evaporated, replaced by a deep empathy for the sheer impossible burden he was carrying. He had been fighting a public corporate war and a private life-or-death battle simultaneously, with his newborn son as his sole anchor. The dramatic moment resolved into a recognition of shared humanity. Elias immediately took Elara's suspension notice, tore it in half, and without a word pulled out his bespoke phone. He placed a call directly to Mr. Jennings, not to fire him, but to deliver a sharp, fact-heavy command. Elara was to be immediately reinstated with full back pay, but that wasn't all. Elias then stood before the gathered executives and security team, and with the clear, authoritative voice of the CEO delivered a concise, powerful statement that addressed the events of the last 12 hours. He publicly commended Elara for her compassion and for prioritizing the life of his child over the letter of the employee handbook. He confirmed the successful merger and closed the tense chapter, but the real final resolution was personal. Within an hour, Elara was officially promoted to guest relations manager, a new salaried position created specifically to embed a human-first approach into the Fairmont's strict service culture. This new role came with health benefits, a substantial pay increase, and critically comprehensive childcare support, acknowledging the very struggle Elara had faced. The hotel, which had always felt like a cold corporate entity, suddenly began to breathe, the staff buzzing not with fear but with a renewed sense of value. Several weeks passed. Elias's wife was safely home, and Leah was thriving. Elara, now in a sharp new suit, was leading training sessions on compassionate service, a true guide to the staff. She saw Elias one quiet afternoon in the lobby, carrying his wife's belongings for checkout. They didn't need a lengthy conversation. Elias simply offered a sincere, exhausted nod, the ghost of the panic from that 1:17 a.m. shift finally gone from his eyes. He said only, "Thank you, Elara, for everything you did for Leo." He didn't thank her for the tip or the rule-breaking. He thanked her for her fundamental kindness. This story, unfolding across one intense night, showed everyone in the Fairmont Grand Hotel, from the lowest staff member to the executive suite, that wealth and power are temporary masks but the urgent, simple needs of a human being, a child, a tired father, are universal. Compassion is the only policy that truly pays dividends. The rules matter, but sometimes a simple, immediate act of kindness is the only thing that saves us.